The man in the alley was not breathing right. Marcus Bell heard it before he saw it, a wet dragging sound coming from behind a row of dumpsters on Halden Street, the kind of sound a body makes when it has given up trying to work properly. He almost kept walking. He had done a 10-hour shift at the pharmacy. His shoes were falling apart, and his daughter Lily was waiting at home with a babysitter he could barely afford for one more hour. But the sound pulled at him the way a crying baby pulls at a parent, some old wiring that would not let him ignore it. He turned into the alley. A man was slumped against the brick wall, suit jacket torn at the shoulder, one shoe gone, his head tipped back at an angle that looked wrong. His lips had gone a pale shade of blue, and his chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven pulls. Marcus dropped to his knees without thinking. He pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck. The pulse was there, but it was thin, like a radio signal fading in and out. Marcus had seen this before, back when he still worked the overnight desk at County General, before everything in his life fell apart and he had to leave nursing behind to raise a little girl on his own. He knew what a man dying of cold and alcohol looked like. He knew he had maybe 20 minutes before this stranger's heart gave out in the freezing dark. There was no time to call an ambulance and wait. Not in this neighborhood, not at this hour. Marcus made a decision that would change both of their lives, though he did not know it yet. He hauled the stranger's arm over his shoulder, gritted his teeth against the dead weight, and half carried, half dragged him out of the alley toward his apartment 3 blocks away. By the time he got the man through his front door, his own arms were shaking and his shirt was soaked through with sweat, despite the cold. He laid the stranger on the couch, cut away the ruined jacket with kitchen scissors, and wrapped him in every blanket in the apartment. He forced warm water between the man's lips, one careful sip at a time, checking his pulse every few minutes, like a man counting down a bomb. Lily peeked out from her bedroom doorway in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, who is that?" "Someone who needed help, baby. Go back to bed. Daddy's got it." She trusted him the way 6-year-olds trust their fathers, completely and without question, and padded back to her room. Marcus stayed on the floor beside the couch the rest of the night, watching a stranger's chest rise and fall, refusing to let it stop. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, the man's breathing evened out. His color came back. His pulse steadied under Marcus's fingers into something strong and even. Marcus finally allowed himself to lean back against the wall, exhausted, hands raw from the cold and the work, and closed his eyes for just a moment. He had no idea that the man breathing quietly on his second-hand couch controlled a company worth more money than Marcus would see in 10 lifetimes. He had no idea that in a glass office tower across the city, security teams were already in a panic, and a board of directors was preparing an emergency statement for the morning news. All Marcus knew was that a stranger was alive because he had stopped to listen to a sound in an alley, and that in 6 hours he needed to be at work, and that his daughter needed breakfast, and that none of what had happened tonight would pay a single bill. He drifted off, sitting upright on the floor. When morning light hit the window, the stranger's eyes opened. His name was Julian Hart, and he did not know where he was. The ceiling above him was wrong. It was cracked in one corner, painted over so many times the texture looked like dried riverbed. The couch beneath him smelled like someone else's detergent. His head throbbed with a pain that felt like a fist closing slowly around his skull, and when he tried to sit up, the room tilted sideways and refused to settle. He had fragments, a dinner with investors, a toast that turned into 3 toasts, someone laughing too loud, and it might have been him. After that, nothing. A wall of gray where his memory should be. He noticed his shoes were missing. He noticed his jacket was gone, replaced by a blanket that smelled of fabric softener and something warm, like a kitchen. He noticed, with a jolt that cut straight through the headache, that his phone was nowhere on him. Panic arrived the way it always did for Julian Hart, quiet and controlled, dressed up as calm. He had learned a long time ago never to let panic show on his face, not in boardrooms, not in hospital waiting rooms, not anywhere, but underneath the stillness, his mind was already running through worst outcomes: robbed, drugged, taken somewhere to be used against him or his company. A small girl in unicorn pajamas walked past the living room doorway, saw him awake, and shouted toward the kitchen. "Daddy, the man is up." Julian's brain, still fogged, tried to make sense of the sentence. A child, a father, a kitchen. None of it matched any scenario he had built in his head. A man appeared in the doorway holding 2 mugs of coffee, looking like he had not slept, dark circles pressed deep under his eyes, wearing a faded gray t-shirt with a pharmacy logo on the chest. He set 1 mug down on the coffee table in front of Julian without ceremony. "You're probably confused," the man said. "I found you in an alley on Halden last night. You weren't breathing right. I brought you here because the nearest hospital would have taken too long, and you didn't have that kind of time." Julian stared at him. "You brought me to your home, with your daughter here. I checked your pulse every 20 minutes. She slept through most of it." The man said it like it was nothing, like saving a stranger's life was a chore he'd already crossed off a list. "I'm Marcus, by the way. That's Lily." Julian looked down at himself, at the borrowed blanket, at his bare feet, and something loosened in his chest that he did not have a name for yet. "My wallet," he said slowly. "My shoes. Gone before I got there. Somebody must have taken them while you were out. I didn't touch anything that wasn't already missing." There was no defensiveness in the way Marcus said it, no plea for Julian to believe him. He simply stated it as fact and turned to check on something in the kitchen, as if the conversation was already finished in his mind. Julian sat with that for a moment, turning it over. In his world, everyone wanted something the second they learned who he was. Employees wanted raises, investors wanted returns. Even friends, if he was honest with himself, wanted proximity to what he had. This man had not even glanced at his phone to see whose name flashed across the cracked screen sitting on the counter. Julian reached for the phone himself. The screen was shattered, but still lit. Notifications stacked on top of each other, more than 200 of them, all from the last 10 hours. He unlocked it with shaking fingers, and the first headline that loaded made his stomach drop. Cross Financial CEO missing since last night. Board convenes emergency session. Stock down 6% in early trading. He read his own name under a photo of himself in a suit, looking calm and composed in a way that felt like it belonged to a different person entirely. Julian Hart, 41 years old, one of the wealthiest men in the state, had been unconscious in an alley 6 hours ago, and nobody in his empire had the faintest idea where he was. Except the tired man in the kitchen making eggs for his daughter, who still had not asked him for a single thing. "You know who I am," Julian said quietly. Marcus glanced over his shoulder, unbothered. "I know your name is trending on a broken phone I found next to a dumpster. Doesn't change what happened last night. Most people would have called the police the second they saw my face. Most people weren't focused on whether you were going to stop breathing." Julian sat there in silence, watching this stranger crack eggs into a pan for his daughter, like the last 12 hours had not happened at all. He thought about his own house, the one with 5 bedrooms and nobody in most of them, the security cameras, the assistants who managed his calendar down to the minute, and how none of it had been there for him in that alley. This man's couch had been there instead. "I want to pay you," Julian said, "whatever amount makes sense. You saved my life." Marcus turned around fully this time, spatula still in hand, and looked at Julian with an expression that was not anger, not quite, but something firmer than Julian was used to seeing directed at him. "I didn't do it for a receipt," Marcus said. "Drink your coffee. There's a car service number on the fridge. They'll take you wherever you need to go." He turned back to the eggs like the matter was closed. Julian sat on the couch a while longer, coffee cooling in his hands, staring at a stranger's back and feeling, for the first time in longer than he could remember, completely unsure of what to do next. By the time the car arrived to take Julian home, the sun had fully risen over the city, and Marcus had already left for his shift at the pharmacy. Lily dropped off at school on his way. Julian stood alone in the small apartment for a moment before he left, looking at the space heater in the corner, the crack in the ceiling, The small shoes lined up by the door in two sizes, one child's and one adult's, both worn thin at the soles. He memorized the address before he walked out the door. He did not know yet what he planned to do with it. He only knew that something about that apartment, and the man who lived in it, had lodged itself somewhere behind his ribs and refused to leave quietly. The car pulled away from Halden Street, and Julian Hart, missing CEO, billionaire, and man who almost died in an alley the night before, watched the building shrink in the side mirror and felt, for reasons he could not yet explain to himself, like he had left something important behind. Marcus did not think about Julian Hart again for 3 days. There was no room in his schedule for thinking about billionaires. His car needed a new belt, a repair he could not afford until his next paycheck landed. His landlord had slid a notice under the door about a rent increase that would eat almost everything he had left over each month. Lily needed new shoes, the ones by the door worn through at the toe, and he had been quietly putting off buying them while he juggled the numbers in his head at 2 in the morning, the way he did most nights since his wife Diane passed. He did not tell people about Diane unless he had to. 2 years now. Some days it still felt like a wound that had only just closed, tender if pressed the wrong way. He had been a nurse once, good at his job, moving up toward a supervisor role, before she got sick, and everything else in his life had to shrink down to fit around hospital visits, and treatments, and, eventually, a funeral. After that, nursing had felt impossible. Every hospital hallway a hallway he had walked with her. He took the pharmacy job because it paid enough to survive and did not require him to stand in rooms that reminded him of losing her. He did not regret pulling a stranger out of an alley. He would do it again tomorrow. But he also was not going to spend his limited hours wondering what happened to a rich man who was, by now, almost certainly back behind a desk somewhere, surrounded by people whose entire job was making sure he never had a bad night again. So when a black car pulled up outside the pharmacy on a Thursday evening, and a man in an expensive coat stepped out of it and walked toward the entrance like he owned the sidewalk beneath his feet, Marcus almost did not recognize him. Then Julian took off his sunglasses, and Marcus's stomach dropped somewhere near his shoes. "You're stocking shelves," Julian said, looking around the narrow aisle like he had wandered onto a film set. "I thought you might have some kind of security detail after what happened. I thought at the very least someone might be protecting the man who saved my life." "I have a mop and a name tag," Marcus said, setting down a box of cough syrup. "That's the extent of my security detail." Julian's mouth twitched, something close to a smile that did not fully arrive. "I came to say something I should have said properly 3 days ago. Thank you. Actually, thank you, not the kind you brush off with coffee and eggs. You already said it. I said it wrong. I said it like a man trying to close a transaction. That's not what I meant." Julian glanced toward the register where a teenage cashier was pretending very hard not to stare at them. "Can we talk somewhere that isn't next to the antacids?" They ended up in the small break room in the back, a space with 2 folding chairs, a microwave with a cracked door, and a coffee maker that had seen better decades. Julian looked entirely out of place in it, and seemed to know it, which Marcus found, despite himself, slightly likable. "I looked into you," Julian said, no apology in his voice, just fact. "I know that's probably going to upset you, and I'll say up front, I'm not sorry I did it. I needed to understand who the man was who did what you did." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "And what did you find?" "That you used to be a nurse. Good one, from what I could tell, on track for a supervisor position at County General before you left. That your wife passed 2 years ago. That you've been working 2 jobs since then to keep your daughter in a decent school district, and that you turned down a hospital position last year because, and I'm guessing here, walking those hallways again was more than you could manage." Marcus said nothing for a long moment. The break room hummed with the sound of the old refrigerator in the corner. "You had no right to dig into that," Marcus said finally, quiet, controlled, the anger there but banked down low. "You're right. I didn't." Julian did not flinch from it, did not soften it with excuses. "I'm telling you because I don't want to sit across from you pretending I don't know things I know. I've spent my whole life around people who play games with information, who hold things back to use later. I'm not going to do that to you." "Then what do you want?" "I want to offer you a job." Julian said it plainly, the way Marcus had said things to him 3 days earlier. No dressing it up. Cross Financial has an engineering and systems division that consults on infrastructure projects. Real work, real salary, real benefits. Not charity. If you take it, you'll interview like anyone else, and if you can't do the job, you won't get it. I'm not going to hand you something you can't hold. Marcus's first instinct was suspicion, sharp and immediate. He had spent 2 years learning that when things seemed too easy, there was usually a hook hidden somewhere inside them, something that would cost him later, some version of himself he would have to trade away to keep it. "Why?" Marcus asked. "You already said thank you." "This isn't thank you, this is something else." Julian was quiet for a moment, and when he answered, his voice had dropped the polish it usually carried, something rawer underneath it. "Because you didn't know who I was when you carried me 3 blocks in the cold. You didn't Google me while I was on your couch. You didn't take a single photo, didn't call a reporter, didn't ask what my name was worth. I have people who manage my calendar down to the minute, and not one of them was there in that alley. You were." He looked down at his hands. "I don't know how to explain what that did to me, except to say I haven't stopped thinking about it. I'm not offering you a job because I feel sorry for you, Marcus. I'm offering it because you're the only person who's treated me like a person in longer than I can remember, and I don't want that to just end with a thank you note." The break room was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Marcus thought about the rent notice sitting on his kitchen counter. He thought about Lily's shoes, the toes worn thin. He thought about the version of himself that used to stand in hospital hallways solving problems that mattered, before grief had folded that version of him away into a drawer he had not opened in 2 years. "I'm not taking a favor," Marcus said finally. "If I interview like anyone else walking in off the street. No skipped steps, no whispered instructions to whoever runs the process. If I'm not good enough, tell me I'm not good enough." "Agreed," Julian said, and for the first time since he'd walked into the pharmacy, something like relief crossed his face. "I wouldn't want it any other way either." They shook hands over a folding table in a break room that smelled like burnt coffee. 2 men from entirely different worlds, agreeing to something neither of them fully understood yet. That night, after Lily was asleep, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with the job posting pulled up on his cracked laptop screen, reading through the requirements for a position he had once been more than qualified for, back before life rearranged all of his plans. His hands hovered over the keyboard for a long time before he started filling out the application. Across the city, in an apartment far larger than Marcus's entire building, Julian sat by his window with a glass of water instead of the liquor that usually filled it, and thought about a coffee mug set down on a table without any expectation attached to it, and could not remember the last time anyone had given him something for free. 3 days later, Marcus walked into Cross Financial's downtown office tower, wearing his one good suit, the same one he had worn to his wife's funeral, freshly pressed for the occasion, and rode the elevator up 32 floors to interview for a job he desperately needed and refused to be given. He had no idea, stepping off that elevator, how much more his life was about to change, or how much attention his name was about to draw, some of it kind, some of it not kind at all. The interview room on the 32nd floor had glass walls and a view of the entire city skyline, and Marcus sat across from 3 engineers and a director of infrastructure named Grace Powell, who did not smile at him once during the first 20 minutes, and did not need to. She asked him about load distribution in aging bridge structures, about materials fatigue, about a system failure case study from a decade earlier that most people in the industry had already forgotten. Marcus answered every question the way he used to answer them years ago, before grief had packed that part of him into storage, and felt something in his chest unlock with each answer, like a door swinging open on a room he had assumed was gone for good. Grace did not know about the alley. She did not know Marcus had ever met Julian Hart. Julian had insisted on that, had walked her through the hiring process personally weeks earlier and told her plainly that if a man named Marcus Bell applied, she was to evaluate him exactly as she would anyone else. No shortcuts, no soft grading, and if he did not measure up, she was to tell Julian directly, and Julian would accept it without argument. Grace, for her part, had assumed this was some kind of test of her own judgment, a way for Julian to see if she would bend under pressure from above. She had no intention of bending for anyone, and she said as much to her team before Marcus ever walked through the door. By the end of the interview, Grace set down her pen and looked at Marcus with an expression that had thawed considerably since he sat down. "Your background is unusual for this role," she said. "Nursing, then a gap, now applying for structural engineering consulting. Walk me through that." Marcus had rehearsed an answer to this exact question in the mirror the night before, but standing at the edge of it now, he found himself telling the truth instead of the polished version. "I trained in structural engineering before I became a nurse," he said. "My father was a nurse, and I switched paths in my 20s because I wanted work that felt more immediate, more human. Then my wife got sick, and nursing became something I couldn't do anymore, not because I stopped being good at it, but because every hospital hallway reminded me of losing her. I took a job stocking shelves because it let me be present for my daughter without falling apart every day at work. I'm not looking for a favor here. I'm looking for a chance to use the parts of my brain that have been sitting idle for 2 years." The room was quiet for a moment. One of the younger engineers, a woman named Sophie, glanced at Grace with an expression that suggested she had already made up her mind. Grace closed the folder in front of her. "We'll be in touch by Friday," she said, which in the world of corporate interviews usually meant nothing at all, but the way she said it, with the faintest edge of warmth breaking through her professional tone, told Marcus something different. He left the building that afternoon and picked Lily up from school, and when she asked him how his big meeting went, he told her it went well, and did not tell her how much the answer to that question would end up mattering for both of their lives. Friday came, and with it, a phone call from Grace Powell offering Marcus the position, salary nearly triple what he made at the pharmacy, full benefits, a start date in 2 weeks. Marcus sat on his kitchen floor after the call ended, back against the cabinet, and let himself cry for the first time in longer than he could remember, not out of sadness, but out of something that felt dangerously close to hope, a feeling he had trained himself not to trust anymore. He called Julian that evening, the first time he had reached out first, instead of the other way around. "I got the job," Marcus said, "fair and square. Grace didn't go easy on me." "I know," Julian said, and Marcus could hear something in his voice that sounded almost like pride, though Julian had no real claim to it. "She told me herself you were the strongest candidate she's interviewed in 2 years. I didn't have to say a word. Thank you for not saying a word. Thank you for making it easy not to." There was a pause on the line, comfortable in a way that surprised both of them. 2 men who 3 weeks ago had been complete strangers, one dying in an alley, the other saving him without a second thought. The trouble started the following week, not from anything either of them did, but from a junior employee in the communications department who noticed an unusual note in Julian's calendar from weeks earlier, a personal meeting logged simply as Visit, M. Bell, Pharmacy, and put 2 pieces of information together that were never meant to be connected in public. A whisper turned into a message to a friend. The friend worked at a media outlet, and within days a gossip website ran a story with the headline, "Cross Financial CEO's Mystery Rescuer Revealed," tying together Julian's overnight disappearance weeks earlier with Marcus's sudden new job at the company. The story spread faster than either of them expected. By Wednesday morning, there were reporters camped outside the Cross Financial building, hoping to catch Marcus arriving for his first week. By Wednesday afternoon, one of them had found Lily's school. Marcus got the call from the school office in the middle of a meeting, Lily crying in the background, a photographer having tried to get a picture of her through the playground fence during recess, frightening her enough that she refused to go back outside for the rest of the day. Marcus left the building without a word to anyone, drove faster than he should have, and found his daughter sitting in the principal's office, knees pulled up to her chest, refusing to look at the window. He held her until she stopped shaking, and then he drove straight to Cross Financial, walked past the reception desk without waiting to be announced, and found Julian in a glass-walled office on the top floor, in the middle of a meeting with 3 other executives. "Everyone out," Marcus said, and something in his voice made all 3 of them leave without a single question asked. Julian stood, already reading the situation on Marcus's face. "What happened?" "A photographer went after my daughter at her school today. She's 6, Julian. She was scared to go back outside for recess because someone with a camera decided her father's private life was worth chasing down for clicks." Julian's face went pale in a way Marcus had not seen since the morning he woke up disoriented on the couch. "I didn't authorize anything like this. I didn't leak anything. I need you to know that." "I believe you didn't leak it. That's not the point. The point is, I told you from the start, I didn't want exposure. I didn't want this to become a story, and somehow it became a story anyway, and now my daughter is the one paying for it." Julian sat back down slowly, the weight of it visibly landing on him. "You're right," he said, and there was no spin in it, no attempt to soften the blame or shift it elsewhere. "This is on me, even if I didn't do it directly. I built a company where information like this leaks because people think proximity to me is worth trading. That's my failure, not yours, and I'm going to fix it." He picked up his phone immediately and called his head of communications, and Marcus stood there and listened as Julian, in a voice colder and more precise than Marcus had heard him use before, ordered every reference to Marcus and his daughter removed from any pending stories, threatened legal action against the outlet that ran the piece, and instructed his team to issue no further comments about his personal life to any journalist under any circumstance, effective immediately. When the call ended, Julian looked up at Marcus, something apologetic and tired in his eyes. "I should have thought about this before I ever showed up at your pharmacy," Julian said. "I was so focused on thanking you the right way that I didn't think about what attention I might bring into your life by doing it. That's on me. I'm sorry, Marcus, truly." Marcus felt some of the anger drain out of him, replaced by something more tired than furious. "I need you to understand something. I didn't pull you out of that alley because I wanted a new life. I did it because you would have died otherwise. Everything since then, the job, the money, all of it, has been good, and I'm grateful for it. But my daughter didn't sign up for any of this, and she can't be collateral damage in whatever story people want to tell about you and me." "She won't be," Julian said. "I'll make sure of it, whatever that takes." By the end of the week, the story had been pulled from every outlet that had picked it up. The photographer who had gone to Lily's school had been identified and banned from any future access to Cross Financial properties or events, and Julian had personally called the school principal to apologize and arrange additional security around drop-off and pickup times, quietly, without his name attached to any of it publicly. Marcus started his new job the following Monday, walking into the same glass tower where reporters had camped out days earlier, now empty of anyone with a camera, and sat down at a desk that felt, for the first time in 2 years, like it belonged to the version of himself he thought he had lost for good. Marcus's first month at Cross Financial did not feel like a fairy tale, and he was grateful for that. Fairy tales made him nervous, the way they made everything look effortless, like problems dissolved the moment the right person showed up to notice them. His life had never worked that way, and he did not expect it to start now just because his paycheck had changed. Grace Powell ran her team the way she had run his interview. No patience for shortcuts, no interest in whether Marcus had a personal connection to the CEO. If anything, she seemed determined to prove to herself and everyone around her that she had not lowered any standard to hire him. She assigned him to a bridge retrofit project in the northern part of the city within his first week. A real project with real deadlines and real consequences if the calculations were wrong, and she reviewed his work with the same sharp eye she gave everyone else on the team. Marcus welcomed the pressure. It reminded him of a version of himself that had existed before Diane got sick, a version that solved problems for a living instead of just surviving each day one shift at a time. He stayed late some nights not because anyone asked him to, but because the work pulled at something in him that had been dormant for 2 years, and it felt good to want something again instead of just enduring it. Lily noticed the change before Marcus did. She told him one evening, while he helped her with a school project on a kitchen table that no longer had unpaid bills stacked on the corner of it, that he smiled more now, even when he thought she wasn't looking. Marcus had not realized he was doing it until she pointed it out. Julian, for his part, kept his distance in the ways that mattered. He did not visit Marcus's desk to check on him, did not mention their connection in company meetings, did not do anything that might suggest Marcus had special standing in the building. He asked Grace for quiet, honest updates on Marcus's performance, the way he would for any employee he had a personal interest in tracking, and when Grace told him Marcus was, in her exact words, one of the sharpest hires the division had made in years, Julian felt something warm settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the company's bottom line. But something else was shifting in Julian too, something slower and less visible than a new hire's onboarding. He had stopped drinking the way he used to, not all at once, not with some dramatic vow made in front of cameras, but quietly, night by night, replacing the glass of scotch by his window with water or nothing at all. He told himself at first it was simple caution, a man who nearly died once being careful not to repeat the mistake, but the truth ran deeper than caution. Every time he reached for a drink out of habit, he thought about waking up disoriented on a stranger's couch, about a child in unicorn pajamas peeking around a doorway at a grown man who had nearly killed himself with carelessness, and the shame of that image did more to keep him sober than any warning from a doctor ever had. He started showing up earlier to work and leaving earlier too, something his assistant noted with visible surprise the first week it happened. He began sitting in on meetings with junior engineers instead of only department heads, listening to people whose names he had never bothered to learn before, people who had ideas about the company's direction that never used to reach his desk because they got filtered out somewhere in the layers of management above them. One afternoon, an engineer named Ben Carter, barely 2 years out of school, gave a presentation about a materials sourcing problem that could save the company several $1 million a year if implemented correctly. The idea had been sitting in a drawer for 8 months because nobody senior enough had bothered to look at it. Julian approved it on the spot, in front of the entire room, and watched Ben's face light up in a way that reminded him, uncomfortably, of how rarely he used to make people feel seen. He thought about Marcus more than he expected to during all of this. Not out of guilt exactly, but out of a kind of quiet gratitude that had nowhere obvious to go. He had spent years building a life designed to keep people at arm's length, convinced that closeness only ever led to people wanting something from him. Marcus had cracked that theory apart without even trying to, simply by being decent to a stranger who had nothing to offer him in return. 6 weeks into Marcus's new job, Julian invited him and Lily to a small gathering at his home. Low-key, nothing like the galas and fundraisers Julian usually hosted for cameras and donors. It was just a handful of people, some employees Julian genuinely respected, a few old friends who had known him before the money changed how people looked at him, and Marcus and Lily. Lily spent most of the evening chasing Julian's enormous, good-natured dog around the backyard, shrieking with laughter every time it knocked her gently off balance with an overly enthusiastic greeting. Julian watched from the porch with a glass of sparkling water in his hand, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, felt no urge at all to check his phone. "She likes you," Marcus said, joining him at the railing. "The dog likes her more," Julian said. "I think she might be the first person in months that dog's actually excited to see. Most people who come through here are too nervous around him. Kids don't know to be nervous around things like that yet." "No," Julian said quietly, "they don't." They stood there for a while in comfortable silence, watching Lily fall into a pile of leaves and immediately demand the dog do it again, and Julian felt, standing on that porch, something he had not expected to feel again after years of building higher and higher walls around himself. He felt like part of something, not because of anything he owned or controlled, but simply because a tired father and his daughter had decided, without asking anything in return, that he was worth including in an ordinary evening. That night, After Marcus and Lily left, Julian sat alone in his enormous house, the kind of quiet that used to feel comfortable now sitting a little heavier than usual on his shoulders. He thought about all the people who had drifted through his life over the years, the ones who had wanted deals or introductions, or simply the appearance of closeness to his success, and how few of them had ever asked him a single question about how he was actually doing. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Marcus before he could talk himself out of it. "Thank you for coming tonight. It meant more than you probably realize." The reply came a few minutes later. "Lily's already asking when she can see the dog again. So am I, honestly. Thank you for having us." Julian read the message twice, set the phone down on the table beside him, and for the first time in a long time, went to bed without pouring himself anything at all. 6 months passed the way months do when a life is finally moving in the right direction, quietly, without announcing themselves, until one day Marcus looked up and realized how far he and Lily had come from the apartment with the space heater and the shoes worn thin at the toe. He had moved them into a 2-bedroom place in a better part of the city, close enough to a good elementary school that Lily could walk there with a neighbor in the mornings, far enough from Halden Street that Marcus no longer had to drive past the alley where he had found Julian gasping for breath on a cold night that felt, now, like it belonged to someone else's life. He had been promoted twice at Cross Financial, first to a senior engineer position, then to lead a small team of his own working on infrastructure safety reviews across 3 states. Grace Powell told anyone who asked that hiring Marcus Bell was the best decision she had made in a decade running her division, and she said it without a hint of favoritism in her voice, because it was simply true. Lily had stopped flinching at loud knocks on the door, a habit she had picked up during the brief, ugly week when reporters had circled her school hoping for a photograph. She had a best friend now named Grace's daughter Emma, and the two of them spent weekends building elaborate blanket forts across Marcus's living room floor, forts that stayed up for days because Marcus no longer had the heart to make her take them down. Marcus still thought about that night in the alley sometimes, usually late, when the apartment was quiet and Lily was asleep. He thought about how close he had come to walking past the sound entirely, exhausted from a double shift, wanting nothing more than his own bed. He thought about how differently every single day since then might have unfolded if he had made a different choice in that one small, ordinary moment. Julian's life had changed too, in ways that were harder to measure on paper, but just as real underneath the surface. He had restructured decision-making at Cross Financial so that ideas from junior staff reached leadership directly instead of dying quietly in layers of middle management. He had started a mentorship program that paired senior engineers with new hires from backgrounds like Marcus's, people whose careers had been interrupted by circumstances outside their control, giving them a second look that the traditional hiring process would have skipped over entirely. He had not touched alcohol since the night he woke up on Marcus's couch, not because anyone forced him to stop, but because every time he thought about reaching for it, he remembered exactly what it had cost him to lose control that badly, and exactly who had been there to make sure it didn't cost him his life. He still worked long hours, still carried the weight of running a company that employed thousands of people, but something in how he carried it had shifted. He no longer treated kindness as a transaction to be tracked and repaid. He no longer assumed that every person who showed him warmth wanted something hidden underneath it. Marcus had proven, simply by existing the way he did, that some people helped others because it was the right thing to do, full stop, with no invoice attached. On a Saturday afternoon in early spring, Julian drove out to Lily's elementary school for her class's spring recital, an event so far removed from anything on his usual calendar that his assistant had asked twice if the entry was a mistake, before finally accepting that no, the CEO of Cross Financial really did intend to spend his Saturday afternoon watching a room full of 6- and 7-year-olds sing slightly off-key songs about the change of seasons. He sat in the back row of folding chairs, unnoticed by most of the parents around him who had no reason to recognize his face outside a business page, and watched Lily take her spot on the small stage in a yellow dress, scanning the crowd until she found her father in the second row. She waved, delighted, and then spotted Julian sitting further back and waved at him too with the same open, uncomplicated joy, as if his presence there was the most natural thing in the world. After the recital, as families milled around the gymnasium eating cookies from a folding table, Marcus found Julian standing slightly apart from the crowd, hands in his pockets, watching Lily show her yellow dress off to a cluster of classmates. "You didn't have to come to this," Marcus said, though there was no complaint in it. "I wanted to," Julian said. "I don't get invited to many things where nobody wants anything from me afterward. Turns out I like it." Marcus studied him for a moment, this man who had once been unconscious on his couch, now standing in a school gymnasium in an expensive coat that looked slightly out of place among the folding tables and construction paper decorations, and felt something settle in his chest that was closer to friendship than gratitude at this point, something neither of them had expected the night Marcus found him in that alley. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "Always. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I just kept walking that night? If I'd decided I was too tired and let someone else find you, or nobody found you at all?" Julian was quiet for a long moment, watching Lily across the gymnasium, her laugh carrying over the noise of the crowd. "Every day," Julian said finally, "not in a way that scares me anymore. In a way that reminds me how much of my life since then has been a gift I didn't earn on my own. I had every resource in the world at my disposal that night, security teams, money, connections, and none of it was there in that alley. You were. A man with almost nothing extra to give, who gave it anyway. I didn't know who you were." "I know. That's the whole point." Julian turned to look at him directly. "If you'd known, would it have changed anything you did that night?" Marcus thought about it honestly, the way he tried to think about everything now, without the exhaustion of those 2 hard years clouding his judgment the way it once had. "No," he said. "I would have done exactly the same thing. Money or not, dying or not, breathing bad in an alley is dying or not, and I wasn't going to let that happen to anyone if I could help it. That's why none of this," Julian gestured vaguely at the world beyond the gymnasium, the company, the money, the life Marcus now had, changes what happened that night. I didn't buy your kindness after the fact. You gave it to me before you knew there was anything to buy." They stood there for a while longer, 2 men from entirely different worlds who had somehow become, against every reasonable expectation, something like family to each other, watching Lily and her friends chase each other around folding chairs in a school gymnasium that smelled like cookies and construction paper glue. Later that evening, after Julian had gone home and Lily had fallen asleep in the back seat during the drive, Marcus carried her up to her room and tucked her into bed, pulling her shoes off gently, new ones, purchased without a single moment of hesitation over the price tag the way he once would have had to weigh. He stood in her doorway for a moment, watching her sleep, and thought about the version of himself from 6 months earlier, sitting on a kitchen floor doing math that never balanced, wondering how he was going to keep everything together for 1 more week. That version of him had not known, walking home from a late shift on an ordinary Tuesday night, that stopping to listen to a strange sound in an alley would end up rewriting the rest of both his life and his daughter's. He had not saved Julian Hart because he was a billionaire. He had saved him because a man was dying in the cold, and that was reason enough, full stop, no further explanation required. Everything that came after, the job, the house, the friendship neither of them had expected, all of it had grown out of that one simple, unremarkable decision to care about a stranger with absolutely nothing to gain from it. Marcus closed Lily's door softly and walked back down the hallway of an apartment that finally, after 2 long years, felt like a home instead of a place he was simply surviving in. Outside his window, the city lights spread out in every direction, and somewhere among them, in a house far larger and far emptier than it used to feel, Julian Hart sat by his own window with a glass of water instead of scotch, thinking about a family that wasn't his by blood but had become his anyway, one unremarkable, ordinary night at a time. Neither of them ever forgot the alley. They simply stopped needing it to define them, and let what grew out of it, quietly, without any headlines or grand gestures, become the real story instead.